Thank you very much again for the introduction. Minesh has given an excellent introduction to the questions of liability for AI if it goes wrong, and some of the potential solutions which we might arrive at under legal systems. I'm going to look in this presentation at one particular solution, which is perhaps the most controversial of those that have been suggested to date, but one which I think has a significant amount of merit to it. That is the legal personality of artificial intelligence. I'm going to cover 5 things in this presentation. Firstly, the difference between moral and legal rights. Second, moral arguments for AI having rights and similarities with other things in the past that have been granted increasing amounts of rights. Third, pragmatic arguments for AI having legal personality. Fourth, challenges and objections to legal personality. And finally, the kind of things that we would look for if AI is to be granted legal personality. So first, I'd like to distinguish moral and legal rights. It's important to understand that there are differences between what we term moral rights, those rights that we grant to entities because of their inherent values, and legal rights, which are the types of rights which are found in legal systems. So there are different justifications for both moral and legal rights, ethical and pragmatic ones. Pragmatic justifications are a means to an end, and ethical justifications rely on ideas of morality, ideas of what is good and bad, right and wrong, which perhaps go beyond laws. And there is an overlap between moral rights and legal rights. So to give an example, not every moral right is upheld in law. If I say to a friend, I will meet you tomorrow night at the marina, and then I decide I don't want to meet my friend at the marina, then I have not broken any law, but I have broken a promise. That promise was not a contract, so I've committed a moral wrong to my friend because I have promised them I've let them down, but I have not committed a legal wrong. So we can see that not every moral right is a legal right. Also, not every legal right is a moral right. Sometimes the law might require something which morally does not have an impact. I'll first look at moral justifications for giving AI rights and why we might want to give AI rights in virtue of other things who we've given rights to in the past. The key thing I would like to say about moral rights is that they are constantly developing. Our idea of what it is to protect rights is constantly changing. Up here on the screen is a monkey called Naruto. And Naruto was a claimant in a US court case recently because Naruto took this picture of himself. He picked up a camera which had been left on the floor by a photographer, and Naruto took this picture, and it became a very valuable picture. Mr. Tano is going to speak in some more detail after the lunch break about the implications of artificial intelligence for intellectual property. But we see from the Naruto case that sometimes animals are having an impact on intellectual property. The argument of Naruto the monkey, or at least the people who are arguing on the monkey's behalf, was that the monkey should hold some rights. So our idea of animal rights is constantly changing. Now, some people will say rights for AI is ridiculous. It sounds like a crazy idea. Why would you want to do that? But in the 1820s, people said exactly the same thing about rights for animals. So people said that animals are just like machines. They don't have feelings, they don't have thoughts. And then in 1822, in the UK, the country passed one of the first pieces of legislation in the world protecting animals, saying that you could not mistreat horses, for example. You cannot harm a horse. You cannot cause it to suffer unnecessarily. So this was one of the first laws. So we can see that over time, things change. And there is no end point necessarily. To give a recent example, in the US Supreme Court, it was claimed that monkeys in a zoo were being denied their freedom, that they should be allowed their freedom in the same way that humans should be given their freedom. The case was rejected, perhaps fortunately, but the point remains there is constantly a debate as to what rights should be given to entities. It's not fixed. Even with human rights, there have been many developments over the last 200 years. In America, slavery was legal well into the 19th century. This is a picture of an American Supreme Court justice who ruled in a famous case called Dred Scott that slavery was legal. He said that a slave is the property of his owner, and therefore a slave can be treated however the owner wants. But of course that has now changed, and we recognize universally that slavery is not permissible. So again, we can see even with humans that our views, our opinions change over time. Not just with animals and humans, the environment now is being given rights of its own. On the screen is Methuselah, which is the name for a tree in the US, which is said to be one of the oldest trees in the world. And many people feel that parts of the environment should be given some protection. And in fact, in some constitutions around the world, the environment has legally protected rights. In Ecuador, that is the case. Under the statute of the International Criminal Court, it is a crime against humanity to destroy the environment unnecessarily in warfare. So environmental rights are also constantly changing, constantly developing. To conclude on the idea of moral rights, the point I'd like to make is they're not necessarily set in stone. They can develop over time, and perhaps they could develop for AI also. We don't have AI which has feelings right now. We don't have AI that can feel pain. We don't have AI which is conscious. But maybe in the future we will do. And maybe in the future we might want to think of AI more like an animal, which you can't harm without good cause. But we're not there yet. So the rest of my presentation is not going to be talking about protecting the moral rights of AI. It's going to be focusing on the pragmatic grounds, the much more economic grounds for treating AI as a legal person, for giving it legal rights. There are two questions within legal personality for AI. First, is it possible? And secondly, is it desirable? Do we want it at all? Turning to the first question, is it possible? I would say that legal personality for AI definitely is possible. In order to understand this, we need to look at what is legal personality. What does it mean to say that you are recognized by a given system of law as a legal person? A famous theorist, Hans Kelsen, said that legal personality is just a bundle of rights and obligations. And if we look at the US Supreme Court in a case from the 19th century, one of the first cases in the world to recognize legal persons as being separate from their owners, the court said, a corporation, a company, is an artificial being. Indivisible, so you can't break it up, you can't touch it, it's intangible, and it only exists in law. You can't see a company, but it still exists as a matter of law. And because it's the creature of law, it has only the properties which the charter of its creation confers upon it. So the idea is that a company, a corporation, a legal person, only has the rights which we give to it. We decide, as legislators, as judges, as administrators, we decide what rights a company has. So how could personality for AI be possible? One option, and this has been suggested by some legal writers around the world, is to house AI within an existing corporation. So we have limited liability corporations. They are very common. We have partnerships. There are many types of corporations in different jurisdictions around the world. One option is that we try to put AI within its own existing corporation. And this is a bit like a hermit crab. A hermit crab, you might be familiar, doesn't have its own shell, but it takes the shell of another crustacean and it lives inside it. So it takes something else and makes it its house. That's a bit like what some people suggest we could do with AI, to house it within something which exists. And some people have argued that you could do this with existing corporations. I don't think that's such a good idea, because existing corporations are designed to be managed and run by humans. They're designed for other economic reasons. They're not designed to deal with the types of unique issues that AI gives rise to, that I spoke about earlier and that Mr. Tanner spoke about earlier. What would happen if legal personality for AI was recognized? I suggest that it would have a knock-on effect. So if one country recognizes AI as having a legal personality anywhere in the world, very soon afterwards, other countries would have to recognize AI as having legal personality also. So the one country which recognizes it first has a real advantage in doing so. This is because we have an idea in legal systems which you will be familiar with, I think, called mutual recognition of foreign companies. And in the EU, there is even a law which says that if a company is recognized by any EU country, then it must be recognized by every other EU country. Other countries may have their own laws which say this, or it may be something which is done on a case-by-case basis. The point is, even if you do not recognize something as having legal personality, if another country does, then it's likely that your system of courts will also grant that recognition, unless there is a reason not to do so. So to give an example of where this has happened, in India, temples are recognized as having legal personality. They can hold property, they can go to court, they can sue other entities in their own name, temples. In the UK, temples are not recognized as having legal personality. They're not within the set of legal persons that we see there as being appointed. And yet, in a UK court case, an Indian temple sued people in the UK for the return of an idol which was stolen from the temple. That's the idol on the screen. And the temple was recognized by the UK Court of Appeal as having legal personality in the UK, even though, and they described it as being little more than a pile of stones. So a pile of stones on the ground, because it was recognized in India, was also recognized in the UK. That's an example of the way that if you're a first mover with recognizing AI legal personality, other countries may well follow. And here's an example of a potential first mover. This is Sophia, the robot created by Hanson Robotics, and in 2017, Saudi Arabia gave Sophia citizenship at a big international conference. Now, we don't know what citizenship means. It probably had no legal consequences. But nonetheless, it's interesting, and we can see that even neighboring regional jurisdictions to Dubai are starting to think about recognizing AI as having legal personality. Now, Saudi Arabia didn't do any legal thinking around what this means. It was just a publicity stunt. But there's the possibility for other countries to do something which is more than just a publicity stunt. So now I'm going to look at some of the justifications for giving AI legal personality. Now, I'm not suggesting AI is the only solution. Mr. Tanner has already suggested various other solutions to the question of who is responsible when AI causes harm, but it is one potential solution. It could be used alongside others. So let's say that we grant AI legal personality, that we treat it like a company. And you'll be familiar with lots of companies that operate in your jurisdiction. The main point is that companies are separate from their shareholders. They're separate from their directors. One justification is to bridge the accountability gap. Mr. Tanner raised the question, who is responsible? Is it the designer? Is it the operator? Is it the owner of the AI system? Well, we could solve that problem by saying the AI system is itself responsible. So we don't need to ask these complicated questions. If you have an autonomous vehicle which hits somebody and kills them, you might say that the autonomous vehicle, it made the decision, therefore the autonomous vehicle should be treated as being responsible. And in fact, the European Parliament has proposed this idea of AI having its own legal personality in a resolution of February 2017. It's important to say that this resolution is not binding on Europe. So it's not the law in Europe right now that we have legal personality, but it is a proposal which at least some people think is worth taking forward. They spoke about creating a specific legal status for robots so that at least the most sophisticated autonomous robots, interesting that they used autonomous because that fits into the definition that I spoke about earlier, could be established as having the status of electronic persons responsible for making good the damage they cause. So the idea is that the owner isn't responsible for making good the damage, for paying compensation to those who are harmed. The AI system is responsible. Another justification is to bridge what's known as the retribution gap. This is similar to liability, but where something really serious has happened, where a crime has been committed, often we feel we want to punish somebody, and we want to punish the person who made the meaningful decision that led to the harm. And instead of trying to punish the designer who may not have known that this harm was going to take place, it may fit better into punishing someone or something to punish the AI system, because the AI system has made the decision. In some countries, we also have corporate criminal liability, where you can hold a company criminally liable for harm. And that would be similar to this justification. A third justification, this is moving into the economic role of AI, is that AI can now conclude contracts on its own. And in fact, there are now some court cases about contracts, particularly high-frequency financial trading contracts, which are not concluded by humans, they're concluded by AI systems. On many of the exchanges selling stocks and shares, selling derivatives in the world, it's not humans who are deciding when to buy, when to sell shares. It is computer systems. And some of these computer systems are now AI systems. So one of the justifications is to allow these computer systems to conclude contracts. Because if we don't give AI its own legal personality, then it's possible that whoever designed the system, if the AI makes a bad deal, they could say, well, I didn't want this AI to make this decision. I would have told it not to, so I should not be responsible for this, that the contract is void, that it did not come into being. And there are cases about this. There's one in the UK, there's one in Singapore at the moment, perhaps there will be one in Dubai quite soon. So this is a real problem about who is responsible if AI makes a contract. A next justification is if AI does something creative. We've spoken a lot about AI causing harm, but actually AI can also create things. This picture up on the screen was not designed by any human. It was designed by an AI system. So who owns it? We don't have a good answer for that yet. We could do if the AI which created it was able to own it. A fifth justification is to drive national economic growth. And we've heard from the excellent presentation this morning about Dubai as the smart city and the many fantastic initiatives that were spoken about, that this is very much an aim for Dubai. And we've seen reforms to corporate law being used to drive national economic growth in other countries. So to take the Caribbean islands, particularly places like the British Virgin Islands, they have had a lot of growth in terms of companies establishing themselves there because in the 1970s they reformed their corporate law, so we now have many what are called offshore companies registered in a jurisdiction which has favorable laws. Similarly, we have many ships which are registered in Greece, many ships which are registered in Liberia, because they have made themselves favorable jurisdictions in order to register those particular things. If a country does that, if a city does that for AI, perhaps it could draw in more AI companies by creating the legal structures which are tailored to this technology. There are, however, many challenges to AI personality. As I said, it is a controversial topic. Lots of people in civil society, particularly in Europe, have resisted AI legal personality. There was a letter to the European Commission from many different experts who said that they thought it was a very bad idea to give AI personality after the European Parliament proposed this. However, I think these objections are mistaken because they're confusing corporate rights, legal personality, with human rights. And as I said at the beginning, human rights, animal rights, moral rights are very different from legal and economic rights. And what I'm proposing is not that we give AI any human rights. I'm not saying we should allow AI to marry or allow AI to vote. What I'm suggesting is that maybe we should treat AI like a company. And so I think this response from society, this fear about giving AI rights, is misguided. Some people say that AI legal personality would be used as a shield to protect designers of AI, owners of a system, from the consequences of harm which is caused. Now, that is true, but actually that is not such a bad thing. Because if you think about it, that's exactly what companies do. The whole invention of a company with limited liability is to protect the owners. It's to protect the entrepreneurs, to protect the investors from responsibility if that company perhaps causes harm, if that company loses money, makes a bad deal. So in order to aid innovation, sometimes we need to give protection to the people who are innovating. And that is what AI legal personality might be able to do. You might have people who say, I am more willing to innovate in a country which protects me from some of the consequences if my innovation is not so successful. There's another objection of AI rights being privileged over human rights. But we have this balance with existing companies as well. You cannot steal from a supermarket, even though a supermarket is a corporation. So, in that sense, we do sometimes privilege legal persons over humans, but there's nothing wrong with doing that. And it's important that each society should strike the right balance between rights for legal persons and rights for humans. Finally, I'm going to look at some of the features which might be helpful, which might be necessary if we want to grant AI legal personality. Because if you just grant AI legal personality without thinking about what features it needs to have, then it might not solve the kinds of problems of liability that we were looking at earlier. So we need to think about certain necessary parts. Firstly, we need to be able to identify the artificial intelligence. There are lots of different types of computer systems, and you might have one program which is used in many different locations around the world. So, for example, a Tesla car. It might be designed in California, and it might use an algorithm in California, but there will be cars all around the world. Is each car a separate legal person, or is there just one legal person in California? We need to work out this distinction, and it might need to be different depending on which application we're looking at. So we need to answer that question. We need to know which AI it is we're looking at. One way of doing this is to have a register of AI. Just as we have a register of companies, each company has a number, and if it is not registered, then it has no legal personality. So perhaps we need a register of AI. Secondly, the AI doesn't need to own itself. We would want to have a structure where AI can be owned, perhaps by a company, perhaps by a human, perhaps by several companies. And we can see that we are very familiar with this from existing legal systems. You might have an operative company at the bottom, owned by another company, owned by another company, and so on, up to the top. We would need to give the AI certain rights, some rights but not others. Certainly at the beginning, we would want to limit these rights to economic ones which serve the purpose of solving some of the issues that I spoke about earlier. So the right to hold property, that would be important. AI should be able to own its own property. For example, if AI creates a new design, the AI should be able to hold that. Also to sue in court. So if somebody copies that design, the AI should be able to go to court and be represented. To make contracts in its own name. I spoke about earlier how many contracts already are being made by AI. So that's another legal right that we might want to give it. And as I've explained, there is no limit to the number of legal rights which we can decide to give to a corporation, to a legal person. It's changing all the time. For example, recently in America, it was recognized that companies should have the right to free speech, which is something that only humans had until recently. AI should also be able to incur obligations. So it would be no good if an AI harms you, but then we can't hold the AI responsibility for that harm. So the ability to incur debt, to owe money to another party, that would be important. The ability to make good any damage that they may cause. How would we sanction AI? We might need to require that AI have a minimum level of capital in order for it to operate in a certain field. Just, for example, in the same way that for banks, you cannot start up a bank if you don't have any money within your bank in order to make good the liabilities. So banks have to have a minimum level of capital, something like around 10% of their obligations they need to hold in capital. We might want to say the same thing for artificial intelligence. So there could be minimum asset requirements for AI. That way, if you're harmed by an AI system, you would know that the AI can always make good that harm that it has caused you, so that there would be certainty for people interacting with AI. It could build trust in artificial intelligence. One of the big issues at the moment, one of the main reasons why people don't like adopting AI at the moment, why some of the public are scared about AI, is because they don't know who is responsible if it causes harm, and they don't trust that they will be made good if they are harmed. So giving AI legal personality could solve that problem also. It's not just good for the owners of AI, it's not just good for the entrepreneurs, it could also be good for those who are interacting with it. AI could be managed by humans in the same way that companies are managed by humans. So just because we give AI its own legal personality, it doesn't mean that AI has to be able to take all of its own decisions on its own. Just as a company has a board of directors, AI could also have its own board of directors. So to conclude on legal personality for AI, we need to start off by distinguishing moral and legal rights. They're not the same thing. Right now, the only important discussions for AI are legal rights, rights which serve a pragmatic economic purpose, which can increase the economic well-being of a society, of a country. These include accountability for harm caused, the ownership of benefits created by the AI, and also fostering innovation. There are, of course, some remaining technical and legal challenges to creating AI legal personality, but what I would say is that there is a great opportunity right now to do so. The question is which country is going to take it. Thank you very much.